I want to speak today on the nature of evil. We're gathered today under crushing darkness. On Tuesday, less than 300 miles away, an evil man murdered 19 children and 2 teachers. Within hours, I was on a plane back to Texas from Washington, and I spent the entire next day in Uvalde. There I sat down with law enforcement, with local officials, and I joined in a community prayer vigil that evening as the entire community was reeling from the shooting. We prayed together and we cried together, mourning the unspeakable losses that have shaken the Uvalde community and that have gripped our entire nation. There are no words to describe a monster who enters a school and murders little children. 19 little kids. 19 families in Uvalde who lost their little boys and their little girls. 2 families of teachers who aren't here with us anymore. Now, some may be naive enough to confuse their virtue signaling with real solutions, but most are engaged in the most cynical kind of politics. Most are engaged in the most cynical kind of politics. As President Obama did this week, quote, "It is long past time for action, any kind of action. Do something," they demand. And here, perhaps to the surprise of some, I emphatically agree. There have been too damn many of these killings, and we must act decisively to stop them. But what is the something we should do? The elites who dominate our culture tell us that firearms lie at the root of the problem. By elites, I refer to some of the most powerful politicians and their allies in the media, the leaders of the largest corporations and many of the most famous celebrities, and those who echo and amplify them. Their resources are limitless. Their megaphone is enormous, and their voice can be deafening. Many of these same people make their accusations from behind great bulwarks of safety, from gated communities equipped with private security, or at the very least, from safe and expensive neighborhoods protected by high home prices and low crime rates. Such people can afford an indulgent ideology that ignores reality. As is so often the case, those furthest from the halls of power are the most dependent on the ability to defend themselves. For millions of Americans, the right to keep and bear arms is not theoretical, it's not abstract. For a single mom in a dangerous neighborhood, it is a matter of basic security.
News at 11. The teens tear down the back door, only to discover mom is on the other side, locked and loaded.
I let them know I had a gun once they was in the house, and they challenged me and said I don't have a gun. So that's when I shot off the first round.
Now this video has gone viral. Her husband, thankful he gave his wife this assault rifle just 2 weeks ago after a different break-in attempt.
If I haven't prepared my wife for this kind of situation, I could have came home to a family that was gone.
So what do police think about this mom defending her home and her two small kids in this way? The chief of police said
she certainly protected herself, her young children that were upstairs in the residence. She did nothing at all wrong. Even after the victim advised the suspects that she was armed, there was an aggressive attempt to continue to enter into her residence.
Taking guns away from these responsible Americans will not make them safer, nor will it make our nation more secure. In an age where elites embrace defunding the police, when homelessness runs rampant, when gangs dominate entire communities, and when radical district attorneys refuse to prosecute violent crime in cities across America, rarely has the Second Amendment been more necessary to secure the rights of our fellow citizens. But many would still tell us that the evil on display in Uvalde or in Buffalo derives from the presence of guns in the hands of ordinary American citizens. It's far easier to slander one's political adversaries and to demand that responsible citizens forfeit their constitutional rights than it is to examine the cultural sickness giving birth to unspeakable acts of evil. It's far less comfortable to ask why despair and isolation and violent hatred is so prevalent in America. It requires a sick soul to drive a truck into a crowded sidewalk, to plant a bomb at a marathon, or to fly a plane into a building. It requires a sick soul to open fire in a movie theater, or in a church, or in a school. A speeding automobile in the hands of a madman is deadly, as is a jet airplane. Tragedies like the events of this week are a mirror, forcing us to ask hard questions, demanding that we see where our culture is failing. Looking at broken families, absent fathers, declining church attendance, social media bullying, violent online content, desensitizing the act of murder in video games, chronic isolation, prescription drug and opioid abuse, and their collective effects on the psyche of young Americans is both complicated and multifaceted. It's a lot easier to moralize about guns and to shriek about those you disagree with politically. But it's never been about guns. We know that places with some of the most restrictive gun laws, places like Chicago and Baltimore and Washington, D.C., they don't have less gun violence. Indeed, they contain some of the most dangerous communities on the face of the earth. We also know that there are communities in places like Texas with extraordinarily high rates of gun ownership and extraordinarily low rates of gun violence. We know that keeping guns away from citizens who follow the law does very little to keep them away from criminals who ignore the law. We know that there are no more guns per capita in this nation today than there were 50 or 100 years ago. That's worth underscoring. In 1972, the rate of per capita gun ownership in the United States was 43%. In 2021, the rate is 42%. The rate of gun ownership hasn't changed. And yet, acts of evil like we saw this week are on the rise. And we have to ask ourselves why. The press will tell us these horrific crimes occur only in America. That simply isn't true. The data show, according to the Crime Prevention Research Center, quote, out of the 101 countries where we have identified mass public shootings occurring, the United States ranks 66th in the per capita frequency of these attacks and 56th in the murder rate. But to be clear, one is one too many. We know that many of these who seek to commit the most heinous crimes, they're isolated from human contact. They're living a virtual life in the absence of community and faith and love. None of that excuses their heinous acts. None of that reduces the evil of their deeds. But these are questions we have to answer if we want to rescue our country. I ask these cultural questions because mere technocratic solutions, the acts of legislators or of government regulators, will not alone solve what ails us. And those who proclaim that it will are not telling you the truth. They are demagoguing for political gain. There have been too damn many of these killings, and we must act decisively to stop them. But what is the something we should do? To Washington Democrats, the answer is so-called universal background checks and banning so-called assault rifles. And the more aggressive among them call for banning all firearms. Here's the problem. Their so-called solutions wouldn't have stopped these mass murders, and they know this. The Uvalde shooter, and I won't use his name, and nor should anyone else, he should fade into eternal anonymity. But that son of a bitch passed a background check. As for so-called assault rifles, which the left and the media love to demonize, these guns were banned for 10 years, from 1994 to 2004. And the Department of Justice examined the effect of the ban and concluded that it had zero to statistically significant effect on violent crime. So why is it that so many politicians advocate policies that they know won't work, that won't stop these horrific crimes? The answer for too many of them is that their real goal is disarming America. They point gleefully to other countries that have disarmed their citizens while overlooking the rise in crime and sexual assaults that has repeatedly followed. If they succeeded, these horrific crimes would not end. Gun bans do not work. Look at Chicago. If they worked, Chicago wouldn't be the murder hellhole that it has been for far too long. And the reason is simple. The law-abiding citizens follow the law. But the criminals do not. That is why they're criminals. But let me tell you what would happen if they succeeded in confiscating guns. Many more people would lose their lives. Here's a statistic from the Obama White House, hardly a right-wing source. Guns are used defensively to stop a crime between 500,000 and 1 million times every single year. That means if the left disarms America, those crimes would no longer be stopped. Many more single moms and